Welcome to a live episode of the Play-by-Play, a sports media talk show brought to you by Awful Announcing. I am Ben Axelrod. He is Drew Lerner. And Drew, I think we talked about this a few times. There are some days where we're really kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel for topics and trying to find interesting things to get us through several episodes a week. This is not one of those days. This is one of those days where I didn't even really feel compelled to check in with you about what we would talk about. The big breaking news today: ESPN and Penn Entertainment mutually agreeing to end their partnership. They were just a little under 2 years since the launch of ESPN Bet, 2 years into what was supposed to be a 10-year deal. It will come to an end on December 1st. ESPN Bet will now move to under a different name under Penn, and ESPN is entering a partnership with DraftKings in which DraftKings will be the official odds provider and have an expanded presence on ESPN. Drew, I just threw a lot at you there, though. What was your first reaction when you saw the breaking news that ESPN Bet was coming to an end?
It made sense, I think, from a business perspective. It's just like running a sports book. And I know, so ESPN was, essentially just the branding, right? But running a sports book is not the core competency of ESPN, and people do not associate the ESPN brand with gambling, right? So I think you and me are in the same boat where, we probably went and downloaded the app and signed up and got the sign up bonuses. And then I don't think I opened the app a single time until last month when ESPN launched their new app, so I could see and test if their integration with their betting app actually worked. So it just didn't have the market share. It didn't really make much sense for ESPN to put their name on it because of how much blowback potential there is, to the brand when you're associating yourself so directly with a sports book. And then on the other hand, you go into a partnership with DraftKings. Well, that actually makes a lot more business sense. You look at DraftKings share in the marketplace and they're top dog alongside FanDuel. So I think just from a pure business perspective, it makes a lot of sense for ESPN. On the Penn side, I'm not sure, where the business sense is other than you're saving yourself $150 million a year by not licensing the ESPN name anymore.
Yeah, it seems like Penn maybe is pivoting now. They're going to focus more on online casino gaming. I don't know how much they're even going to be trying to really compete with the big dogs like DraftKings and FanDuel. And they were even behind BetMGM and Caesars. So I think as of May, ESPN Bet was fifth in terms of market share, and it was just over 3% market share. This was not, to your point, everyone I know got ESPN Bet when it first launched, because that's what you do when these sports books launch, because they give you $250 in free bets essentially. And then the only other time I ever used it was for some reason here in Ohio. They were the only ones offering UFL odds during the UFL season. And I sometimes bet on the UFL. So that's the only other time I used it. I did not use it for anything else. I'm like you. I was curious to see how the integration worked with the ESPN app. I never even made it that far. I didn't even try. It's just I don't place bets on ESPN. I'm not going to change my betting habits to just so I can have a pop-up notification on the ESPN app. I think you're definitely right. We're aligned in terms of we've written some things that have been critical about ESPN Bet over these last 2 years. And I was always a little more hesitant to, because in my mind, this isn't an ESPN product. This is the ESPN zone. This is they're licensing their name, and it's just they're using their likeness. But I think the thing, and maybe I couldn't see the forest from the trees on it. The thing I was missing, though, is not only were they licensing their name to it, in which case you are inviting that criticism. That's a part of it, is you do become the face of this brand. So I can't really fault anybody who wanted to criticize ESPN's involvement. But you also have the promotional aspect where ESPN Bet banners are running on the screen. You have Mike Greenberg and Stephen A. Smith and L. Duncan branded parlays and profit boosts. You are not doing anything to disinvite that distinction that this is a Penn product, not an ESPN product. And so ultimately, like where I come down on it is, yeah, this was, I think, a bigger Penn failure than it was an ESPN failure. But I cannot fault anybody who wants to take their shots at ESPN. I took my own shots. I think this is their signature failure. I think it replaces ESPN Mobile, which was John Skipper's brainchild for an ESPN branded cell phone.
Yeah, it's a pretty funny comparison. And you're right. Like, who could fault the consumer? It's called ESPN Bet. You have every single top personality on the network pushing their parlays on you every chance they can get. I mean, yeah, you're doing nothing to disassociate yourself. And so I honestly would say it's a failure on both parties, right? You know, I guess ESPN got to cash in a little bit, but let's be honest here. Like, $150 million a year, which is what they were getting from Penn under the licensing agreement, is kind of chump change for ESPN as a business, right? Mm-hmm. If they were smarter about the gaming industry in general and had gotten in a bit earlier, they could have actually presumably had a larger share of the market, been able to compete with DraftKings and FanDuel. But you know, I think being a part of the Disney brand and being under that corporate umbrella kind of stymied any desire, at least from the top of that company, to get into gambling early when, you know, you had to get the brand loyalty for these customers. And that's exactly what DraftKings and FanDuel were able to accomplish. So I think overall, this is a big missed opportunity for ESPN. It was just too little too late. But yeah, like I think they're making the best right now of a bad scenario by doing the partnership now with DraftKings.
Yeah, that's something I was looking back at our archives actually to see like what we have actually written about ESPN Bet over the last 2 years. And that was actually something that Bill Simmons called out at the time. He said like, hey, ESPN's like really late to this. And if you look at it, and this is something I know I've talked with Brendan about in terms of the NBA scandals, like all of this stuff just became so legal so fast, and nobody had a real game plan for it. And I think you're right. I think like ESPN just missed the boat. Like I think ESPN thought like, oh, this is an opportunity. We got this offer. We can use our brand. Like I said, the same way they brand a restaurant in Orlando, the ESPN zone, and like, hey, it will also allow us the ability to like have our own odds and promote a product and all of that on top of the money. And I think it was just a fundamental misunderstanding of this marketplace. I think the funny thing to me about this is now they're following the exact same playbook that Barstool followed after their split with Penn. It's a little different because Penn actually owned Barstool, but it's very similar in the sense that Penn was branding its sportsbook as the Barstool Sportsbook. They wind up leaving that deal to go to the ESPN deal. Barstool is just like, okay, we're going to do a big DraftKings partnership now, and we're going to have Barstool branded segments. We're going to have Barstool branded parlays. Like and it's no different than what Bill Simmons is doing with FanDuel, what Meadowlark is doing to a little bit of a different level with DraftKings as well. Like I think everybody else had kind of figured it out within these last 6 years, and ESPN was trying to make something work that really didn't fit into the model of how any of this works. So that's my long-winded way of saying this DraftKings deal really isn't that different than the ESPN Bet deal in terms of conflicts of interest. The difference is ESPN just doesn't have to attach its name to the actual product and have it be the ESPN Sportsbook, right?
You're exactly right. I mean, you're already, just by partnering with DraftKings, minimizing any sort of brand like reputational risk that is associated with having your name attached to a sports book. But the deal is essentially the same. You're just upgrading from a sports book that has like 1 or 2% of the market share in the United States, something like that, to, you know, one that is, 20, 30. I don't actually know the numbers, but like
closer to 40.
Yeah. See, so that is like the type of difference we're talking about. And so in that regard, like, this is a huge upgrade for ESPN, because you're not associating yourself by name with a sports book, but you're still getting presumably the type of money you would be from Penn, just to have DraftKings odds and parlays and stuff being advertised on your air.
So from a business standpoint, this opt-out comes, and it had been previously reported amid the ESPN Bet's shortcomings that I saw one report that Disney had an opt-out. I saw another report that Penn had an opt-out. So it sounds like maybe both of them had a mutual opt-out at the end of 2026. This is obviously this is a year ahead of that. And so it's hard to think, based on the timing, that all of these scandals and the bad publicity that came with having to drop the ESPN Bet banner during the breaking news of the Chauncey Billups and Terry Rozier arrests, do you think this was a journalistic play? Do you think this was a business play? Do you think it was somewhere in the middle? Because on the one hand, it seems odd that this would come just 2 weeks after all that happened. On the other, these things typically take more than 2 weeks to develop. And all indications were we were already trending in this direction by the end of 2026 anyways.
Right. It was certainly convenient, right? Maybe it sped up the process. I think both sides, it makes sense for both sides, right? Because if you're Penn, you're definitely not getting $150 million of value out of this licensing agreement. And if you're ESPN, you do not want your name attached to a sports book when you're conceivably trying to cover gambling scandals in the NBA and God knows what future gambling scandals will have hit the sports world. I think what the NBA scandal did was kind of illuminate to ESPN, okay, this is actually a reputational issue for us, because we cannot be trying to cover this in an independent journalistic sense while there's literally an ESPN Bet banner on the bottom ticker. I mean, it just makes no sense. So, I don't think it's totally independent. I think these two things were connected.
You mentioned the conflict of interest. How is the DraftKings deal any different, other than just the sports book is not branded as ESPN? Because you're still in business with the sports book. This is going to be a very wide-ranging partnership. DraftKings is going to be available, it looks like, in the ESPN app. I would imagine they're just going to replace those pop-up notifications for the ESPN Bet with DraftKings bets. They're going to be the odds provider. I'd imagine there's going to be DraftKings signage all over First Take and Get Up and ESPN programming. Is there still that conflict of interest? Is it just optically? How is this any different?
I don't think it is. I think maybe to some consumers or some viewers of ESPN, it becomes a little different. I think people are already so exposed to seeing DraftKings on their favorite podcasts or whatever other sports media they're consuming, that maybe there's just a little bit of a wider gap, right, between the association in someone's mind. But from a business standpoint, it is the same. There are those same conflicts of interest. ESPN obviously isn't going to stop cashing in on gambling dollars via advertisements or via any association like this with DraftKings. They'd be silly to do that. We all know that ESPN is no longer a bastion of sports journalism like they might have been at one point in time. There's just too much money on the table to get out of the gambling space completely. So yeah, I don't know. I think it is just kind of an optics thing, but realistically, nothing changes in terms of the conflict.
Yeah, the money definitely doesn't hurt. The other thing I would say though is, not to defend ESPN on this, but there is almost a need to have a consistent sports book, who you're going to for your odds, and who, you're not just going to stop covering the gambling space. And yeah, that does create more inherent conflicts of interest as well. But it's I just think it's totally unrealistic to expect ESPN to abandon sports betting. It's so ingrained now in sports watching and sports culture. It's like you do kind of need an odds provider. You do need gambling experts. You do need like every media outlet, DraftKings, Meadowlark, Barstool, like they all have sports betting content. Like it's like you kind of do need that level of expertise when it comes to the industry. Otherwise, you could also be flat-footed. So that if I'm ESPN, at least that would be my defense.
Yeah, no, you're completely on point there, and not to like get too wonky like between the differences in these sports books, but like if they wanted to make it like a truly like educational endeavor, right? Like if they wanted to have gambling content, but in a way that is like appealing to gamblers, right? Like you don't want to just shut out people that bet on sports entirely. But you want to make it like a something that you're kind of disassociating yourself from a little bit. You wouldn't pick a DraftKings or a FanDuel. You'd pick like a sharp book, like a Pinnacle that provides like the best, like most accurate odds, because then you're able to actually kind of track like, all right, well, what does this mean in terms of the game, right? Like if you're looking at a money line or looking at a spread, when you're looking at a DraftKings line or a FanDuel line, it's often not like truly what like the sharp line is in Vegas, like what would be the most indicative of what the outcome is going to be. So in that sense, like you're still picking to be associated with a book that is like, not fully above board in terms of, they're shutting out sharp gamblers and stuff like that. But that realistically, like you're going to pick one of the two biggest sports books in the country if you're going to do a deal like this. So I don't know. Like I think that it's just like this is the reality of the situation. This is what you do if you're ESPN.
My other big takeaway on the other side of this is I think it's a great deal for DraftKings. I think that DraftKings now having that presence, knowing that they do have such a high percent of the market share. As of May, it was like 37%. Knowing that everybody who bets on sports to whatever degree it is probably has a DraftKings account. It's like if the lines now are the same between DraftKings and FanDuel, and I might be watching a game on the ESPN app, especially if it's college football. I'm probably going to go with DraftKings. It's like, I think that there is something to be said for that. I don't know how much it moves the needle, but it does seem like this is a pretty good deal, without knowing the financial details. Now DraftKings is involved, like I said, with Barstool, with Meadowlark. They're involved with the Action Network, which is one of the biggest gambling focused outlets. I think it's a good deal for DraftKings. That was my other big takeaway here.
Yeah, no, I think so too. And I don't know. I'm definitely not an expert in like the gambling industry. I'm more of an enjoyer and a passive consumer of like news that's happening in that space. But at this point, like I feel like for most bettors, they're pretty locked in, right? You have a few apps. You got FanDuel, you have DraftKings, you might have a couple more, unless you're like a really sharp better or someone that is doing like a lot of line shopping and wants to have like literally 10 or 12 different options. I think FanDuel and DraftKings are pretty locked in. So at this point, like I almost view their marketing, especially of course in markets and states that it's already legal in and has been legal in for a while. It's more like Coca-Cola or Pepsi, like marketing, on NFL games, right? Like you're not trying necessarily that hard to get new customers because a lot of your customers have already kind of bought in. You just want them to come back.
Yeah. You're just reminding them, hey, we're still here. You still have that login. Why? I have my theories. Why didn't ESPN Bet work?
Well, I think we got to it. Like they were just too late. Like, could you imagine if in 2018, before gambling was, legalized and the Supreme Court case happened, if ESPN had launched their version of daily fantasy games, like they could have been one of the biggest players in sports gambling today if they had done what DraftKings and FanDuel had done and kind of prepped and primed themselves to be ready for when sports gambling became legal. But by the time they got into the market, and I think you even see this with some of the legacy operators in Vegas, like if you're looking at the share of BetMGM users and Caesars and stuff like that, like those legacy sports books are even having a tough time in today's mobile gambling world, because they didn't have the user base online on their phones that had like the daily fantasy games. They were hopping in once legalization happened, and they're still like a much smaller player in the overall scheme of things than the two companies that we've talked about ad nauseum here. So I think unless you were one of those like early adopters and first movers, you're already just behind the eight ball. And then of course ESPN has no experience running or being associated with a sports book. So I think there's a lot of failures, but the biggest one is just not being there early enough.
I think my other theory on it would be, I think that Penn largely underestimated its audience and largely underestimated like the intelligence of the average, not even sports bettor, but just sports fan. Like, I think there was this idea that like, hey, Stephen A. Smith promoting a parlay is going to attract customers. Like, if you were betting on a parlay because Stephen A. Smith endorsed it, like, I'm sorry, I'm pretty liberal about all this stuff. You deserve to lose your money. Like, that is far more degenerate behavior than me betting on 25 college football games and 12 team total over unders and all like that. Like, and I don't know anybody who does that. Like, if one of my buddies came to me and was like, hey, look at what Mike Greenberg said I should bet on. Like, I'd be like, are you out of your mind? Like, what, I think people who follow this stuff, and especially people who do follow it through a sports betting lens, they're pretty locked into like who's smart and who's not about this stuff. They know who's talking out their ass and who follows this stuff. Like, I listen to some pretty sharp podcasts. I have no idea what I'm talking about. All my bets are just tailing people who are smarter than me and like gut feels. And I have no shame in saying that. I do it for enjoyment. I have figured out how to do it just like for that small investment part of watching sports. But if like, I think there was this total underestimation of the average sports fan and like what will attract them to bet and why they want to bet. And it's not L. Duncan in a commercial talking up player props. Like, it's just, that's not how anybody bets.
I think that is a great point. As someone who also like, I'm similar to you, right? I hate to admit it, but like I was gambling from like an early age, well before it was like legal, and there was like places to, just go on your phone. I found a way to bet before then. And so if you're one of those people, I think you're the type of person that's going to seek out those sharp bettors and listen to like what they're saying and have like the really in-depth analysis about line movement and stuff like that. You're not ever going to listen to like what Stephen A. Smith is saying. And yeah, I do think there was a fundamental misunderstanding, not just at ESPN, but probably at a lot of sports media companies. I mean, we could talk about Fox Bet. Yeah. That completely went away. That was like a 1 or 2 year experience from Fox Corporation. I think they're lucky enough they have an option to buy part of FanDuel in a year or two, which I think there's some consternation about that from FanDuel's side because of the favorable price for Fox when they do get that option. But I think there was a fundamental misunderstanding from a lot of media executives that like, oh, people just like want to go and, throw bets around, right? Like almost as if you're going to like the horse track. But you have no idea like what horses are good or not. You're just kind of picking and choosing based on the color of the horse or what number they have. No one's betting on football like that, right? You're looking at matchups. You're looking at, stuff like EPA and, advanced analytics. And I think for the vast majority of people that bet on sports, they enjoy doing that. They might not be sharp bettors, but like they're at least going to put in some level of effort into what picks they're making, be that listening to someone that they think is sharp or doing their own research. But no one in their right mind is listening to Stephen A. Smith or Al Duncan on what parlays to make. And this can be extended to every network. I have no idea why. I watch the NFL Today on CBS every week. Why the hell is Bill Cowher and Nate Burleson and Matt Ryan putting together a parlay for me every week. Like that, it makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah. One of these days it will hit though, and you'll never hear the end of it. It will be the CBS's social clip to end all social clips. Yeah. Like you, my first betting experience, I think, came on, it was either Bovada or it might've been known as Bodog back then. And, I think the Browns were like a 10-point underdog to the Vikings. And I was like, wait, the Vikings just have to win by like more than 10 points. Of course the Vikings are going to win by more than 10 points. And of course they did. So, I started 1-0, did not end 1-0, but
that's great. I mean, I miss the days, for a while I had some like Bitcoin sports books back when like Bitcoin was probably like $100 per coin. But then, eventually you get a bookie, and like those were the days because man, those lines were soft as hell. Like those were the good old days when people like me and you, without any expertise, could actually win something because the lines didn't move fast enough.
Yeah. All right. Let's wrap this thing up before we incriminate ourselves any further. Real quick, while I have you. Exactly. That's what they always said until it was actually legal and we could just talk about these things out in the open. Real quick, while I have you here, what is the latest on ESPN and YouTube TV?
Yeah. So I don't know. Like, I think at this point, my best guess would be before Monday Night Football again, but you never really know now. Like, they've dug in. I think me and everyone else that has written about this has been wrong every step of the way. I think everyone kind of expects, you get a short-term extension and then you reach a deal, or you miss a few college football games and you reach a deal before Monday Night Football. But all of those deadlines have passed, and the pressure will only mount. Like YouTube TV is losing subscribers. ESPN is losing money every single day that they are not on YouTube TV. So eventually they will meet in the middle. It's just a matter of when. And I don't think at this point anyone has any idea.
Yeah. I would imagine there are only so many college football weekends, only so many Monday Night Footballs you could miss. I think pretty soon customers get tired of having, free trials run out and those bar tabs run up, and you get tired of having to find alternatives. So right. We'll definitely have you covered on all the latest on awful announcing, but that's going to do it for this today's episode of the Play-by-Play. If you enjoyed the show, subscribe. We are with you every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. Leave a rating, leave a review, tell a friend. We'll be back with you next week, breaking down all the latest in sports media.